Okay, we continue with David Flynn's second lecture, Roswell's Link to 2012. Please welcome back David Flynn.
Thanks a lot for being here again. You know, the link that Roswell has with 2012 is profound. And this whole idea that 2012 is an end point of some type has been popularized by this, the Mayan calendar. I'm not an expert in Mayan or Aztec iconography, but in brief I can say that this is a cyclical calendar. And those four little rectangles that you see in the center around the face represent cycles that end, and there's been 4 cycles. The last cycle is ending at 2012. The Mayan characterized these cycles of destruction by kind of semi-deity sort of animal symbols. And there were one epic destroyed by water, one by earthquake, one by a great puma. The last one is supposed to be of fire. And other than that, well, that's the extent of my understanding of the Mayan calendar, but knowing that there are incredible accuracy when it comes to how it mets out time, how it actually is measuring time. And the way that the Aztec and Maya came across this information is baffling to the archaeologists because it's so uncannily accurate. But if you look at the history of the Maya and the Aztec themselves, they say it was given to them. It was a gift from the gods. And I think I can show you just how linked with heaven the Maya and especially the Aztec are. And I can get more specific than that. I can show you the link with Mars. Now, the story of the Aztec civilization, starting at Tenochtitlan, which is where Mexico City is now, starts in 1325 AD. That was the founding date of Tenochtitlan, where the Aztec had migrated. They called themselves Chichimec, the sons of the dog, which will become understandable or significant in very shortly. They were told in a dream, one of their high priests had a dream, where the god Huitzilopochtli came, who was the god of war, and said, you need to move south and relocate. And so they did, at 19.47 latitude, in the middle of a huge swamp with a mount growing there, and they were supposed to find an actual symbol, which was an eagle with a snake in its claws on top of a cactus. They found that. They built their huge civilization in this mosquito-infested swamp. It just so happens that from 2012 to the founding date of Tenochtitlan of the Aztec is exactly how many Martian days it takes to make their year. 687 Earth days makes a Martian year. There's actually commonality between the Mayan calendar and this motif, which is part of our national seal. There's 2 parts to the official national United States seal. This one side, which is on our dollar bill, very, very common. You take it for granted because you see it almost every day. You see here 13 courses of masonry. And it's kind of rudely drawn in here, but that's 12, that's 13. The Mayan calendar employs 2 major counts of years. One's called the long count, and the long count is broken into backtunes, which are 20 sections, and then those are broken into even further small portions called catoons. A catoon is 19.7 years. And if you take the 13 courses of Masonry, sorry, jumping the gun, starting here, there's 19.7 years from 1756 to 1776, 19.7, 19.7, 19.7, until you end at the last point here, 2012. That's when they expect their feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, or in Maya, Kukulkan, to return. Now, jumping to the west, and jumping to far more ancient civilization, at least in the Aztec, would even be the Hellenistic Empire and then the Roman Empire, where the Apostle John wrote the Apocalypse, or the Revelation. Apocalypse in Greek means basically the same thing, to reveal something, but there's nothing more enigmatic or cryptic about the symbology in Revelation. And there's a lot of interpretation. It depends on what moral alignment you come from, and of course the denomination you come from, or tradition. But I suggest that there's something connected to this idea of the feathered serpent, not just in a deity that supposedly will return, and that has something to do with humanity learning civilization, or being taught civilization, but the timeline itself. And that's because the greatest, the largest constellation in our northern hemisphere is this, Draconis. And it just happens to occupy where the axis, as in precession, as it moves, our northern axis points in a circle which traces right around Draconis. And if you look at Revelation 12, it actually says that the tail of this dragon in Revelation draws a third part of the stars of heaven. There's a third, again, the motif. If you have 100% of something, you have 33.33% of it. But this dragon draws a third of the portion of stars from the heaven. Now, how can that be? I mean, most of the stars that you can perceive in the night sky have many times the stellar mass of our sun. So you can't literally have those coming to the earth. And it's been interpreted metaphorically as, okay, if this dragon represents Satan, then there's he has a hierarchical authority over a third of the angels, then he actually causes them to be submissive to him on the earth. However, those words in the actual phrase about the third part of the stars in Greek, the tail in Greek, heaven itself, they're all from the same root. Hora, horao, ora, oranos. They're all about time. It's always about a cycle of time. It fits right back into the idea of the Ouroboros eating its tail, or the galaxy of our Milky Way aligning with the horizon of the earth. So 33% of a circle is a third of it. And if you take the precession of 25,920 years and divide it in 3 parts, you get that number, 8,640 years. So that is how many years it will take to move 1/3 of the precessional circuit. And lo and behold, that 1/3 of the precessional circuit fits the tail of Draconis, because this is the actual place where our northern axis will point during that duration of roughly 26,000 years. If you go back 8,640 years, you're about right here, 1/3 at the end, where the tail ends. So here's Draco in Celestial Atlas. Here's the third of precession, marked over it in the northern hemisphere. Amazingly, using our Gregorian calendar, which Greek Gregory or Gregori actually means to watch. So it's literally, after Pope Gregory, the watcher calendar, which is anchored at the birth of Christ. So when you write Anno Domini, you're saying in the year of our Lord, you're witnessing to the birth of God in the flesh. Here, you can see at his resurrection point, according to this calendar, there's some debate over if he was born in 2 AD or 2 BC or some point of that. On this calendar, on the Watcher calendar, his resurrection occurred at 33 AD when he was 33 years old, and he was born at, of course, 1. Go backwards. If you're anchoring this third of time at 2012, 2013, you'll have 60 times 33 years from 3380 to 2013, 2012, which is 1980 years. And from 33 all the way to the end of the 8,640 year cycle, 6,660 years, which is another number that shows prominently in Revelation. Here's another graph, a model for you to understand this. It goes back, anchored at 33 to 2013, 60 times 33. That's how many years it is from 33 AD, and 6,660 years back to 6,627 BC. That's a perfect third of precession. I was asked what probably happened here at 6,627 BC, and basically the birth of written history. Now notice the fall equinox. When you go back to the birth of our modern calendar, the birth of Christ, at 1 AD, the sun would have rose at the autumn equinox at the feet of Virgo. When Tenochtitlan was founded, the Mexican capital in Mexico City now, you're pretty much in the center of Virgo. This number here was when Kepler actually drew these lines. So when you get to the fall equinox in 2012, the sun is now bisecting Virgo and Leo. And I have to emphasize the extreme antiquity of these symbols. They've been around since civilization has been around. So I think it's valid to use them in a projection of what's going to happen in the future. Here is a stone structure. It's about maybe 2-3 feet high, made of andesite, or basalt, I think. It's in Tabasco, Mexico. It's an Olmec artifact. It was unearthed, along with a lot of other incredible and really enigmatic sculptures of white people and giant heads that look like they're African. And then there's things that just really don't make that much sense. But this thing really doesn't make that much sense. It's a person staring into heaven, and one side of his face is human, and the other side of his face is a puma. The close-up of it. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a straight-on view of this. I'll have to fly to Tabasco, Mexico next time. And now, we have the face on Cydonia, Mars. A little comparison there. Just how close that is. And you have an analog. And this is my superimposition of a lion. You can see how closely the features match. Here's the eye, the actual structure on Cydonia, Mars, the nose, and this weird sort of mouth structure down here. It really is close. You have an analog in the Judaic Christian canon. In Ezekiel, no less, Ezekiel 41, where he talks about the temple of Jerusalem, the future temple of Jerusalem, actually having this motif repeated over and over and over again in the interior of the holy place. He calls it a cherubim. The Greeks called it a sphinx. And sphinx actually in Greek just means to bind something tightly. A play on the words of the sphinx is to strangle, when you bind your hands tightly around somebody's neck. But it's still the same idea etymologically. Now, St. Albert Magnus He's called the Magnus because he was, in Catholic history, one of the greatest scholars of all time. And in his Book of Minerals, he says something pretty enigmatic, and that is, the power of all things below originate in the stars and constellations of the heavens, and these powers are poured down into all things below by the first circle of the constellations. Now, he's a saint, and he wasn't canonized until, I think, the 1800s, but here he's talking about something that is like the heart of Gnosticism and the heart of the illuminated elite. This is what they talk about all the time, as above, so below. The mirror of heavens is on the earth. What is he talking about? This fits into the whole paradigm of what the Aztecs are talking about with the Mayan calendar. You can find in Homer's Odyssey that he adds a little to this knowledge, to this statement that Albert Magnus made. The Atlas is a magician, and he's the one that knows the depths of the seas. He guards the tall pillars, plural, that keep the sky and earth apart. And then you go on, you can actually learn more using some of the epics of the Greeks that talk about Perseus, one of their heroes. He had to go through he had to actually pass by Atlas, who was holding up the heavens and the earth. And he turned Atlas into stone. And then it says that the actual mountains where he was were actually formed by this event. And you will notice that the prime meridian of the earth runs right through the Atlas Mountains. So basically what I'm implying here is that the pillars of heaven and earth are right on this prime meridian, and that it wasn't placed during the Prime Meridian Conference in 1886 that was set up by our president at the time, Arthur. It wasn't done just by happenstance or that they're having trouble with navigation. It was an incredible, illuminated and elite precedent that had to be established. So if you look at the shorthand glyph for Gemini, it's pillars. It's the only one that's pillars in all the signs. And it just so happens that Gemini is above the brightest star in the northern hemisphere, which is Sirius. So taking Albert Magnus's suggestion that heaven and earth are actually mirrored together, and I have Atlas holding two pillars, the pillars where you would actually have Gemini, which is a shorthand glyph for Gemini, and the prime meridian here, and here are the Atlas Mountains. The rest of the heavens then are right above their constituent places on the earth, which would have to be in a configuration like this. So now you have Gemini here, prime meridian, and then 30-degree swaths each place. Of course, I have the very center of Gemini here, so you're counting 30. Basically, the margin between each one of these is right about here, so forth. So heaven and earth are actually merged now. There's a mirror. And I think the ancients knew this. It was common knowledge. It was taken for granted almost. Here's a different way of looking at it from the North Pole. And then, of course, here's Sirius. Underneath, Gemini. Now, getting back to the founding date of Tenochtitlan, where we get the Mayan calendar, you'll notice the autumn equinox occurs right here, about the center where the sun would rise here on the ecliptic of Virgo. Pay special attention to what's underneath Virgo. This is Corvus, the crow. I'm not really sure if it's always the same species in the zodiacs and the celestial atlases that you can find in antiquity, but you'll always see a bird like this. You can even go back to Sumeria and Egypt and see a bird like this under Virgo. It's attacking Hydra. Here's Virgo over America, and here's Hydra, almost in kind of serpentine sort of fashion fitting the middle American areas here. And your bird, I think Mexico City's about right about there. And this is the sign of Mexico, national flag. Very close similarities then. Now, again, it has its precedent in the Western religious canon, which predates it, by the way. Even the New Testament does. This is a symbol of the gospel writer John, who later was exiled at Patmos and wrote the Revelation. You'll notice something interesting too. Here's this little point in the back of his head. You'll see through antiquity that a phoenix is always represented with this. That gives away the difference between an eagle, just a mere eagle, and a phoenix. It's always that little point. So whoever etched this woodcut, had some inside knowledge about this phoenix. On the left you have an image of John the Revelator writing one of the signs that he sees from Revelation 12. And here's his symbol. Of course, the little point in the back of the head again of the eagle. This guy's name is John too. This is the Virgin of Guadalupe that appeared to him. Here's a symbol of Mexico. You can see there's really quite a similarity between both of these events. Here's a Revelator again, and here's his eagle. Seeing the signs in the heaven, Revelation 12. They're time signatures. They're pointing out how the zodiac works. They're pointing out how the procession works. And it's pointing out that John isn't just metaphorically writing, his whimsies about what he believes the future holds for Christianity and the conflict between the Roman Empire. He's actually being told when some incredible and absolutely mind-boggling event is going to occur in the future. Because it's been repeated over and over again, not just in writing, but in placements of significant ruling capitals of the earth. If you get back to the heaven and earth mirror again, here's Washington, D.C., right at the margin here, 77 degrees, of where Leo and Virgo connect. Now you always see in the celestial atlases, Virgo's holding a branch and a sheaf. And she's got wings. She's a woman and she's in heaven, so she has to have wings. This is from a grimoire that I got for Freemasonry. And you'll notice something really strange. There she's got her branch and the Masonic G, a gimel, by the way, first part of number 3 in the Hebrew number system, and wings. So it's Virgo, and she's pointing to this interesting place here on the northern hemisphere in the North America. It's actually where her limit is, at about 105 longitude to 75 longitude, right there. You'll notice that our capital, which venerates this deity, in a way, because the Gnostic version of knowledge itself is Isis, and there's something about the epic of from Virgo to the last point of Virgo, where Leo is in the autumn equinox. When we actually move into Leo, something transpires, a transformative point in the future. They have Maryland and Virginia wrapped around our capital city. Annapolis, Anna was the mother of Mary. It's the city of Mary. Or Anna's city, I guess. Now this is from Dendra, Egypt. It's explaining where the Dendra zodiac begins and ends. Here you have Leo and Virgo, still in the same sort of configuration, a staff instead of sheaves of grain, but you get the same sort of impression. And then here's the Sphinx, right underneath the whole zodiac train, to show you this is where the beginning and the ending is. And then right over the head, that's an Ouroboros. That is Leviathan. That is a small representation of the Milky Way. In fact, if you go to Egypt and you sit on the Sphinx, which is right here, and you look at the autumn equinox in 2012, what's interesting, since we only move a degree every 72 years in the precession, this is just as valid today. I mean, it's just the smallest little points have changed there. But if you're sighting the Sphinx, which perfectly points east, this is perfectly east. The margin between Virgo and Leo will actually happen at the autumn equinox. We've moved to that place of the Sphinx. A significant thing, because when precession happens, you would think that if you're talking about the gospel narrative, the virgin birth of Christ, which this is what Bollinger and Seiss actually talk about, that the actual zodiac represents the narrative of Christ, the whole gospel, the first coming, and the second coming. Then you would imagine that the sun had moved from Virgo all through the 12 constellations and end on Leo, which is actually metaphorically referred to as the conquering lion of Judah. In the second coming, Christ comes as the lion to rule the earth with the rod of iron and that sort of thing. Well, it doesn't work that way, because the sun doesn't start in Virgo and go this way. It goes from Leo and ends here. And so now we've moved from Virgo to Leo. So what is actually been said by the existence of the Sphinx is look forward to the future when this transition takes place, because this is a time marker and something incredibly significant is going to happen. This is the mother of Ahura Mazda, and the Persian version of Mother Mary and Jesus Christ, and she's riding the back of a lion, and the sun is superimposed behind them. Well, it was actually incorporated and had been incorporated on the Republic of Iran's flag for many, many years. In fact, it goes back almost 3,000 years. And this is Darius at worship. But what's interesting is this is also the time cycle. This is a different version of the Sphinx itself. This is a different version of actually pinpointing that time between when the sun moves in the autumn equinox from between the Virgin and moves into the lion. Here's different versions of what was on the Persian flag. It was changed after the fall of the Shah of Iran in the 70s, and changed to almost like a pitchfork thing, which supposedly says Allah is great. But true Persians who really believe themselves to be separate from the Arabs, they like this a lot. They want to keep it. And you can see the version here where you don't actually see Ahura Mazda's mother standing here. You actually see the face of the Virgin. So it's kind of different. But the sun here is merged right behind him. It's significant because it's pointing out that zodiac transition point. The book of Enoch actually has a reference to the last point in time, that penultimate event that actually starts the ball rolling before everything happens. And he says, "And in those days the angels shall return and hurl themselves to the east upon the Persians and Medes," and that's Iran right now, "and they shall stir up the kings, so that a spirit of unrest shall come upon them, and they shall go up and tread under the foot of the land of his elect." And you'll notice here, when I was talking about Jerusalem actually originally being the place of the Jebusites, and Jebusite means threshing floor, threshing circle, he describes this, and Enoch wrote this book, supposedly historians say that it was written about 2 BC, so it's a pseudepigraphic work, but they say it'll be as a threshing floor to these people from Persia, and that they were actually caused to rise up against Israel by angelic beings. And then, of course, he says, in those days that Sheol, which just means pit or grave in Hebrew, will open its jaws and it will swallow them up. And that'll be the end of them. Consequently, Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, talks about almost exactly the same scenario. And he talked about it many hundreds of years before Enoch did. But here's a little modern headline about the fear that Israel has over the next conflict with Iran. And Mahmud, let's see if I can get this right, Ahmad Ajinadad, he is actually happy about the situation. He couldn't be more happy. If you watch a bunch of documentaries about him, he is mostly focused on the idea of resurrecting or bringing back the 12th Iman, what they call the Mahdi, which is basically an incarnation of the spirit of Muhammad, who was supposedly to bring Islam to the whole world. And this Iman will come out of this 12th Iman will come out of a well in Iran, supposedly. And the only way he will come up is if the whole world is in chaos. And so by attacking Israel, he will cause the world to be in chaos. If he doesn't attack Israel, if he is attacked, then it'll still happen for him. Either way, he wins. Now, this is a hierarchy of the illuminated elite. This is just basically what you see for the Freemasons. That, it's not secret. You can go find out what their hierarchy is, but the symbology is something that's not understood. They don't, explain exactly what's going on with it. But what you'll notice is the ranking system ends at the highest point, 33. And in every single instance, it's always associated with the phoenix. And there's this little triangle over the phoenix's head with 33 written in. That's the highest place you can actually ascend to in ranking in the hierarchy of the illuminated elite. There's a close-up of it. Again, 33 with rays coming out of it, right over the head of this phoenix. And even closer, an interesting variation, a two-headed eagle, which symbolizes past and future. So somehow, here is that dividing point between past and future, or aeon. And it's always associated with this triangular 33. And here's the accoutrements of geography and architecture superimposed over the earth. Well, a phoenix, because that's what this is, it really is a phoenix, it's not just an eagle, has its origin etymologically from the word Phoenicia. Phoenix and Phoenicia actually mean burning bread color. Phonica actually means redness. And the Phoenicians were called that by the Greeks. In some of the versions of why they came up with that name, well, the Greeks, they traded with the Phoenicians and they saw that they were really sunburned from hanging out in the ocean all the time, and that doesn't make much sense. The Phoenicians didn't call themselves Phoenicians, they called themselves Sidonians. And they existed between the highest reach of 33 and the lowest. Here's Phoenicia right here. Here's Mount Hermon, a central point in Phoenicia. And you can see that the actual map that the Knights Templar would have used during the Crusades is that 33 on their meridian, which is in Paris, so that's their zero meridian, would put 33 perfectly through Phoenicia. In fact, really close to Jerusalem itself. So then, of course, 33 in latitude crosses longitude at that place. And it's the only one. That's the difference between the Greenwich meridian and the Paris meridian. And you can see here, that's where Mount Hermon is. In fact, that's the only place, using the Paris meridian, that would ever happen. Longitude and latitude will ever cross on dry land. Then I'm focusing on Mount Hermon because it's from the center of Mount Hermon that Enoch says an extraterrestrial invasion occurred that started civilization up to begin with. And it's also known in the Bible as Canaan. And Canaan is actually the root for the word dog, or at the same time, canon, which means law, or somebody who is cunning, which means intelligent. Canaan actually means lowly in the basic form, to be the lowest. It also represents the star Sirius, in Latin canicula, or in Greek kuna astro, because the star Sirius in the greatest antiquity was always the brightest star in the heavens. It's where the prime meridian of the heavens, was established. It's not the first degree of Aries like the Greeks say. That's only based on where the sun was rising in the spring equinox during the Hellenistic era. Of course, because we have precession, that changes and it's moved quite a bit. So the only place that doesn't change is the brightest star in the heavens. Here you have, supposedly, there's two different foundation myths for Rome. Livy, the historian of Rome, said that the Romans really believed that they were the sons of Mars because Romulus and Remus in the myth are the sons of Mars, and they were suckled from a wolf. And the reason for this symbolism is twofold. Here's Ptolemy. He's actually established where the prime meridian is. You can see he doesn't do it exactly like I have put the prime meridian through the constellation, but it's right up against it. And this is Sirius, the star, the dog star. And so it's actually directly underneath, like I was saying, the pillars of heaven, which are Gemini. And Gemini actually ride out their feet on the Milky Way. So that's why they're associated with milk from the wolf, because it's all symbolism. It's all supposed to get you to focus on this point in the heavens. Here's the Milky Way at their feet, Sirius right embedded in it. Here's the prime meridian of the heavens. If you can establish a reference point in the heavens, then you'll be able to establish understanding of the reference point on the earth and how heavens and earth are actually built together in this way. And then read the clock. Because the clock is pointing out a very important date. Again, going to Mars, the wily and crafty Schiaparelli, who actually mapped Mars when it was closest to the Earth in time, his eyesight was still intact, put the prime meridian right through where Cydonia is on the map. Or he affixed the name Cydonia over where the prime meridian would be. And here's the location of where these enigmatic structures are, and the zero meridian for Cydonia itself. Now back to Roswell. On the morning of July 4th, and almost on the July 3rd too, this is almost where it is on a present day, because the crash actually supposedly happened on the night of the 3rd, but in the morning of the 4th, when the sun rises, it rises in the constellation of the Pillars, where we have the prime meridian of the heavens. And as soon as it rises 19.47 degrees above the horizon, Sirius is on the horizon. And here's a picture from my sky globe, which shows you I'm not lying. Now, it's pointing out exactly what the impact site points out, and the date in the year points out. Now you can actually find this fits to not only connect us to the 4th of July and Independence Day for America itself, but this doesn't work if you go back 20 years or 30 years or 100 years. It only works now, and it won't work again after about 10 years. There's a very narrow window where this works. Now, this is getting back to the whole picture that we actually have a pentagon which shows, by its geometry, how long the precession lasts, 360 times 72. Then the pillars of heaven and the Ouroboros, or the Milky Way, which gives us a reference point to time. I'll get to an epic story in the Old Testament about a dude whose name in Akkadian means the sun, Samson. And Shamash is the word for the sun. This is the basic root for the sun. He was a Nazirite, so his hair was never cut, but eventually it was due to his own error. But it's messianically oriented, and it's also a time signature. Here he's pulling pillars down. He's pulling the system of how time and space actually operate, at least according to us. And the temple he's in is Dagon's temple. Dagon is half man, half fish. A Dagon, a dag in Hebrew means fish. And amazingly, here's another picture of some of the priests of Sumer and in Babylon wearing these little fish hats. The reason for that is, as you have the fall equinox, and actually that's between Leo and Virgo, the spring equinox, the beginning of the calendar, which started in March in antiquity, which means Mars, this is where it's going to happen in 2012. So the sun rises between Pisces and Aquarius. Here you have the same sort of motif, only in a stylized way. On the popes of Rome, city of Mars. And here you have the same idea again. This is supposedly Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Here's a face of a man inside a serpent. Or, interestingly enough, Quetzalcoatl means a feathered serpent. In the Inca cosmology, Viracocha means the sea of foam. And in a lot of ways, the whole Milky Way as a serpent and also as a celestial sea or ocean is being referenced here. This is that dividing point when he is supposed to return. And then again you have the connection between this ancient symbol from Aztec society and John the Revelator. Actually, this is Jonah. But the whole idea of the end times where Jesus says, the only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah, where Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of this fish. Well, he's not just talking about his death and resurrection. He's also talking about a time signature that looks forward to the actual revelation and the actual resurrection of all those who have inherited this eternal power from God himself through the act at 33 AD. This is a little closer version, a little easier way to see. Here's Pisces and Aquarius and the spring equinox at 2012. It's about resurrection. It's about this idea of life after death. The only thing that separates a philosophy from a religion is the version of what happens after death. And these guys are preparing a dude for burial. But the reason they're in attendance with him is because the symbol that they represent is that point in time when this guy is supposedly supposed to wake up again from the dead. Here's Jonah, who's etymologically related to John himself, the Revelator. And he's being spit back onto land by a fish. The emergence. He went into the fish, then he comes out of the fish. So what you're having is this idea of those points merging and then drawing apart again, which is exactly what you have when the sun moves between that margin, which only will occur in this narrow point in time, which will be culminating in 2012. Now, Plato's actually said that geometry is the study of the eternal. Now, that's a pretty intense statement, but that can be proved. Because you get to the geometry of the merging of the highest Platonic solid with the lowest Platonic solid. It's trying to explain something far greater than just numbers. A point is basic, what you start out with. A line, of course, an extension of that. Now you have 2 dimensions. And the very simplest geometric figure is 3-sided. So it's a triangle. A circle is the highest geometric figure because that line, which is represented by pi, is irrational. It goes on forever, as far as we know. The decimal places of pi go on forever. So it's talking about something that's eternal, and this is totally finite. So when you actually have these 2 symbols that represent mortality and immortality, finite and infinite, in 3 dimensions, that's where you have this superposition. And that's why 33 1/3 or 1/3, and these numbers are going to show up over and over and over again because our whole time system is designed around it. And the end of it is this number. We're talking about moving from mortal to immortal here. That's pretty heavy. So you'll actually be able to get away with saying that right now. It astounds me. But I am. Here you have a phoenix over Phoenicia, where the word comes from. Here you have the circle of the Leviathan or the Ouroboros, represented in our zodiac. Representing our galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy. And then here you have a line, 33 degrees, right over where you would talk about Galilee, where Christ performed most of his miracles, where he was stationed here. Capernaum. Here's the Sea of Galilee. And you have the configuration symbolically laid out geographically. And if you look again at the symbols in toto, Jung talks about this as representing two things, death and resurrection, the beginning and the ending. The same thing with the phoenix. They're redundant. They say the same thing over and over again to actually find out that they're oriented in space from our perspective in a way that can say, this is a certain time we're going to approach and that we've never been to. And all four quadrants of our zodiac are saying, this is when it happens, this is when it happens, and this is the main sign because this tells us what happens. This number ties it all together. It's the beginning and the ending. This fits exactly what's found in Revelation 1. The author of the whole scene that has two acts is coming back. Getting back to the Great Seal of America again, you'll notice the configuration here of these stars. They're all pentagrams, but they're arranged in a hexagram, like the Star of David. And then, of course, there's a phoenix, there's a little knob in the back of his head, very subtle, but we can see it. And this is the back of the seal. Or maybe it's the front, but they're opposites. And you'll also notice that there's a little square here, triangle, where the 33s are already drawn in the pictures of the phoenixes in the arcana of the illuminated elite. There's always this little triangle, and there's a 33 there. So if you superimpose both of them, then you get this. Here's the phoenix, symbol of resurrection, superimposed over this. And I had actually shown you how, if you're using the time cycle of the Maya, how this fits into the 2012 time sequence that they have in their calendar. Well, I'll show you an alternative view, because what we're seeing here is this capstone has been represented a lot by Isaiah himself, saying that it's a messianic symbol, or the cornerstone, the chief cornerstone is laid down with shouts of grace to it, unmerited favor. It's a symbol of this idea that God says his creation is somehow saved out of its corruption through his own acts into immortality. What they're talking about here, this symbol, is when this time arrives, men will have ascended or transitioned to their highest form possible, all because of God's act. But it's a time sequence here. So the actual event is superimposed over when it will happen. And this is how it works in North America. This is a base. This is the baseline. You don't count this. This is where you launch from. So now you've got 12 courses of masonry, not 13. Unless, of course, you count the capstone, then you do got 13. And so if you add 12 of these, and you make the duration 19.47, which is the latitude of Washington, D.C. twice, and is repeated over and over again in the internal geometry of Washington, D.C., and I didn't get into that, but of course on the Cydonia itself, then you get, over here, 12 times 19.47 gives you 2009. And actually, this is rounded off, it's like 2009.64. It actually puts us pretty close to the 4th of July, which, by the way, divides our year from 365 days right in half. It's 182.5 days. I guess that's July 3rd that does that. Or if you take 12.12, just continuing on, and multiply it times 19.47, it gives you 2012, if you add that number to 1776. So here is encrypted the end of the calendar, which naturally fits right in with the Mayan calendar. These are the tarot cards. They supposedly have a fairly recent history, maybe the 1500s from Milan. Of course, they're occult as you can get. But the word tarot, here you can actually see it in Hebrew, is a play on the word for rotias, which just means to turn, rotate. It's about the cycle of time, once again. And on top of it, right above the tau, the cross, the end point, the alpha and omega, in Hebrew it's the aleph and the tav. In the ancient Proto-Hebrew, that's what it looked like, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is the Sphinx, the dividing point of the zodiac, with his sword pointing to the phoenix. And then you have the four constituent quaternary points of the zodiac. So you have all your time references, your time frame, and now you're seeing this point actually being indicated again. This is called the Earth card. Here you have a Virgo surrounded by the Ouroboros, and then you have Leo and Taurus. It was interesting because there's still two parts of the quaternary reference points on the zodiac. They're part of the cherubim, two of them. And then these cards, which show up a lot in the card sequence, is judgment. And why that is especially interesting, because the whole card sequence of tarot is supposed to be a miniature version, metaphorically, of man's existence from the beginning to the very end. Whenever you look at judgment in the medieval drawings, you see this, a sort of feminine version of Michael the archangel with scales. Here's a good person, here's a bad person. And this is at the final judgment. This is just a little part of a very large painting of the end, the final judgment. Here's another image, same idea. These guys have been just newly resurrected, and now they're being judged. But you'll notice it's always wings, very feminine looking. Well, it looks like Virgo, and it looks like Libra together. If you go back to great antiquity, you'll actually find the same symbols again, and this is Hathor. There's a feather of truth there, and weighing the heart and the soul of the deceased, right here, who's petitioning for clemency. He's being judged. It's the end. And what's interesting about the idea of the end, judge of all, in antiquity and leading up to almost the present age where it's actually changed, is that was an event that happened to the whole earth. It wasn't to just one person after they died, they'd go through the whole process. It was the whole earth at one point. Everyone was judged. Everyone was given their reward. And you can see that the Egyptians actually rendered Virgo right next to Libra and holding it. What's significant about that is that in the heaven-earth map that's suggested by Albert Magnus, you have Virgo ending right where we are here in Roswell, and then Libra next to that is suggesting what it's all about, an end point. There's a first coming of the Messiah. There's a second coming of the Messiah. The first one was to save. The second one is to judge. This is an interesting thing because most people don't want to look at this. I mean, this information exists in this arcana. Occult, it's spoken over and over and over again in the symbology. But if it's presented from a Christian viewpoint, then people clap their hands over their ears because it's been maligned so intensely. And the reason it's been maligned so intensely is because those who've actually worked to try to suppress it are very powerful, and they have a really good reason for doing so, because if we're talking about resurrection bodily, then we're also talking about a complete overturn of the hierarchy in heaven. because humans aren't supposed to live forever. Only angelic beings are supposed to live forever, and this is the point where it all is supposed to happen, in 2012. So you got to go all the way back to the first time the alien invasion, if you want to call it that, an angelic invasion occurred, and that was during the time before Noah. Well, the Watchers were the ones that disclosed knowledge to men. And that's covered really extensively by the book of Enoch. And so they were destroyed by this world flood. Now, Jubilees is another pseudepigraphic book that takes off in different parts, in different directions, and it's actually attending to the same subject that Enoch works very closely with. And that's the idea of what happened to these beings when they came to the earth. They actually produced human angelic progeny. And these beings totally devastated the civilizations of earth. They actually formed the civilizations, ruled from the civilizations, and then started becoming extremely malignant to the human beings. And when the flood came, the progeny of these watchers, these angels, these rebellious spirits, were destroyed. The bodies were completely destroyed, and that immortal part of them, that spiritual force, was left without a body. And so in the ancient Jewish sages, the references to spirits and demonology, they always point back to that event of the flood as having created them from the Nephilim. This is the word they call them, the Nephilim, which is found in Genesis 6 also. It just means the fallen ones. And so here in the book of Jubilees, it talks about how the Nephilim were destroyed and bound, but some of them were left on earth so that they actually could be used by Satan. They're actually used with God's permission to lead men astray, because it's almost a judicial system where Christ has even talked about this idea of judging and judgment. Now, men can't judge, but after he rises from the dead, he says, you can judge. Now, how can you get authority over angels unless, of course, what Christ did was potent enough? But what's interesting is the law was a focus of Judaism, and the temple was a focus of where that actually was kept. Even the law, the tablets of the law were kept in the temple of Jerusalem. And that's actually called the land of Judah. Jerusalem's in Judah. The word judice in Latin is where we get the word for judge or judicial. It all stems from that main point where the law actually emanates. And of course in Ephesians it talks about we're not actually, as a Christian, wrestling against humanity itself. Of course there's enough about humanity that's difficult in itself, but it's saying that those rulers in heavenly places are what we're up against. And there's been an analogy drawn between the UFO phenomena and what's actually being spoken of here. On my first sojourn to the Roswell talks, my car stopped inexplicably 3 times, and I had to have my brother drive me from Idaho. And I waited for a few hours, and then he picked me up, and I was transferring things into my car, and he took a picture of it to chronicle it. Do you see anything interesting in the image? I'll close in. Look around here. That. We had no idea when it was there, but I understood why my car stopped. The electric system went out totally. Then I went back to my car, and it drove fine all the way back home. Now here's where it gets heavy, because Enoch talks about the end, and he talks about those beings that were destroyed in the flood, but they still have that component about them, the spiritual energy that's still there. And so he explains their nature, and then what's going to happen with them later. The spirits of the Nephilim, which are the progeny of these watchers that came and bred with the daughters of Adam, are as clouds which shall oppress, corrupt, fall, bruise the earth. They shall be concealed and not rise up against the sons of men until they come forth during the days of slaughter and destruction. So what he's saying is they have a certain subtle nature until some point where they suddenly become very obtuse and very unfriendly. This is from the Quran. The Quran actually sets up the same precedent. It talks about how when Adam was made, God actually asked the angels to bow down to him. And the only one that didn't was Iblis, which was their word for Satan, just means the opposer. And he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't bow down. And so God said he was cursed. And so what Iblis' request was, I can't be judged yet because I haven't been given my day in court, or I haven't been able to collect the evidence so that I can present it in court. And so he asked that he wasn't going to have to be judged and condemned until the end of the whole matter, which is until the day when mankind shall be raised from the dead. That's in the Quran, so you can't, it's very difficult and not PC to actually say the Quran's corrupt. You can say that Christianity is, and the Bible shouldn't be forced down people's throats, but this is something I actually agree with from the Quran. And then I should actually get to what are the most obvious things that come out of the New Testament when it comes to what the end times are about and Jesus' warning. And that is, it fits into, of course, the whole paradigm of 2012. The powers of heaven shall be shaken. And at first you think, maybe they're the orbiting luminaries, that the terrestrial planets, and they can mean that, but dunamis actually is also translated as armies, or waiting armies, or forces, or hosts. And the heavens is the place of this order where the heavenly beings dwell. That's a legitimate translation of those two words. So what's amazing to this whole scenario is you find that God actually says, and this is a Septuagint version of Isaiah 13, where he talks about, in the end, there's going to be a day, and that's actually a little bit intangible because it lasts longer than a day. But it's a point where God comes and judges. And he judges every man. And it's interesting that this phraseology is used again, just like in Luke 21. The soul of man shall be dismayed, troubled, pain shall seize them. And then Isaiah 13:5 talks about, he gives a command, he brings them. He actually uses these destroyed Nephilim as an agency for destruction and judgment, which astounded me. But you can check this out in the actual Old Testament Masoretic text. You can go to Septuagint. It says this: are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time insulting. So he's given a command to them to actually come back at a certain point. He gives them actual power to do this. And you can actually see where he talks about in Psalms, where the psalmist, supposedly David, talks about how when the Israelites were removed from Egypt, that God himself sent evil angels to actually produce his will. Now, here is a speculative version of what might actually transpire at this point of 2012, because we're talking about an overturn of hierarchy. We're talking about an angelic realm where their moral alignment is against God, but judicially, they're allowed to remain until a certain time has been allotted for a gathering of evidence to actually show in court. It's a judicial system, where we inherited our judicial system from the Western canon, and then especially the idea of law as it is in the Old Testament. But this is from the book of Enoch, and it actually talks about the one angel that taught mankind how to war. So it's synonymous with Mars. And he was put in a place called Duadel. And Azazel is the one that taught how to make war by making knives and swords and so forth. He's actually the one closest related to Mars in the whole story. Now, Duadel means cauldron of God. And this is Iapetus. Now, Richard Hoagland has done much work on the images that came from Clementine, I think it's Clementine, that went around Saturn and actually viewed this. Now, Clementine was around the moon, it escapes me, but one of the satellites that came past this moon Took some amazing pictures. You'll see this bilateral ridge. It runs right along the equator. It's 31,000 feet high. This moon is only about a third the size of ours. And you'll notice, interestingly, that it's faceted. Regular facets. And it's Richard Hoagland's contention that this is artificial. On one side of it, I've greatly enhanced this picture. It's so black that only 5% of the ambient light reflects off of it. And then the other side's so brilliant that it overpowers the irises of the cameras when they go by. This is another word, orca, for Hades or Hades or Pluto in the Greek. The god of the underworld is also called orca. And the reason for this is the idea that Hades had this huge mouth, but the interior was even greater than the actual portal for all the evil dead to fall. You'll notice this huge impact crater site, which Hoagland has actually said, look, there's still facets here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, octagonal. And then you have this anomalous ridge. It really doesn't look natural. Could it be an actual prison for these beings, deemed too powerful and too malignant to have any sort of power over the solar system, at least for a time? And what's amazing is it wouldn't just be a place for that one angel, but also these hordes of angels that were under him in this hierarchy. The Enoch 54 actually explains it was being prepared, this chain that actually holds these things in place, these beings and this sort of power that is sort of intangible and hard to actually grasp how this could be actually done. But Enoch says that they were prepared for the host of Azazel and that they're cast into this plate, into this place of commendation. Moving on to the actual ancient references for the beings that Enoch is talking about, you'll see that the ones that actually fit this idea of burning and fire and Mars are called seraphim. And the planet they're associated with here is Mars. And that's exactly what Richard Hoagland was saying. He said that Mars was a moon that orbited a planet that actually occupied where the asteroid belt is, and that it exploded, and that there was also other vessels for transporting the beings of this destroyed planet, and Iapetus is one of them. I submit that it is actually a prison for seraph. And it says, interestingly enough, these seraph beings here, this is actually a transliteration of this symbol in hieroglyph for the word for seraphim, and you see interesting portions of Exodus here, where the seraphs that were actually the biting, the murmuring tribes of Israel were cured when Moses put this seraph, that's actually the translation, on his staff. And here, it looks like a griffin. Well, it looks like a cherubim with locust wings. And I might add, what is this? Revelation 9:1-3, and the fifth angel sounded, the fifth planet from the sun is Mars, and I saw a star from heaven fall into the earth. In the literal Hebrew is that not just fallen, but actually this distance is actually closed, so it doesn't actually mean that it had to fall. And there's given to him a key of the pit of the abyss, Abusos. And smoke opened from the pit, and the air was darkened by reason of the smoke, and these locusts came out, and they had 5 months of power over the people of earth. It's not a pretty sight, but interestingly enough, the resources that I've run across point to a literal event, a literal invasion, not something that we can prevent, not something that we can reason away. Full disclosure is just almost something that doesn't need to be the focus, because whether or not we come to any conclusion or our governments explain what's going on, the events are going to come about anyway. Now, getting back to what is it that these things are fighting about? Why would they go to such trouble to focus on our Earth, this one little teeny rock in an incredible vastness of space? Well, you take the superimposition again of the heaven and earth. Here's the anchor at Sirius at the prime meridian. And here's 33 degrees, or even just 30 degrees, you find Taurus. And here's the Pleiades. Amazingly, right here, you have the Taurus Mountains. Right there. And here is Israel and Cydonia. And there's the Pleiades right there, and the Hyades. In Revelation, it talks about the 7 stars in the right hand of the one that John saw, and here he's sitting among. These are the symbols of Israel itself now, this 7-branch menorah. And here is the Pleiades up close. And here is Cydonia. Do that again. Could it be that focus of what these are representing is also on Earth? That there's something about whoever built these, something about the message here that is still embedded and intact in our ancient history and our myth and our religious doctrine. Now, you can focus using the history and the religious doctrine and the Bible, of course, and also the extra-biblical text of Enoch, and it actually says that the Holy Great One, the God that made everything, is supposed to come back from the heavens of heavens, and he's going to judge the watchers, and he's going to bring them back to the earth. And judgment is on all, except for the righteous. He makes peace. They belong to God. And in Isaiah, it talks about the young lion that comes. And when he comes to Mount Zion, where the temple is built, or will be built. This is the prophecies say that the temple is supposed to be built again. It hasn't existed since 70 AD. And it's interesting because it talks about it in almost a ufological format. As birds flying, so will be the Lord of hosts, defending Jerusalem, defending also will he deliver it, passing over it, he will preserve it. Jerusalem actually is central temporally. It actually has bearing in this idea that time and history and space is referenced from it. In fact, you can actually graph this out. When the Jews were actually taken into the diaspora, when they're taken into Babylon, Babylon fell in 539 when the Persians actually went into Babylon without even a fight. And Darius the Mede actually took over in 539 BC. After that point, Cyrus the Great let the Jews go back and build the temple again. So 539 was a huge point in change for the Israelites, and especially the temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians, and it was actually allowed to be rebuilt by the Persians. That happened in 539. Babylon is exactly 539 miles from Jerusalem. In the same way, you can see Susa, where Ezekiel prophesied against, or Daniel, prophesied against the world, the whole world, at the end of days, 666 nautical miles. Nippur, where Ezekiel was, when he was prophesying against Jerusalem itself, saying the Babylonians will destroy you, and none of the Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin or the Pharisees believed him. They thought God will totally save us. Well, Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 587 BC. And as I said earlier, London, the head of the English, who actually ruled over Palestine at the time, right before Israel became a nation again in 1948, the center of London, even the London stone marker set there by the Romans, is at 1948 nautical miles. And it continues. The point of contention is this. only in one place in this universe, according to what we have in writing, only in one place in the solar system, and then on this one planet, the Earth, only one little piece of land has been actually laid claim to by God. And then he talks about actually coming there in a human form, which if you look at the basic canon, explains that Jesus is that form, a human kinsman redeemer. It repeats it over and over again. And interestingly enough, it calls that place in Mount Zion in the sides of the north, the same exact phraseology as the famous satanic I will speech. In the sides of the north is where he wants to go. So we get back to Revelation again. There's a time signature of this, but there's also the moral signature of it. There's a whole turning around of hierarchies, where once there were angels that were immortal and heavenly, they lose their estate, they're thrown down. They're actually pressed down at a certain point at the same time again, though. Those who were mortal are lifted up to the higher place, which fits into the symbology of the Phoenix, which fits into the symbology of the Ouroboros or Leviathan. It fits into the whole paradigm of 33. And it gets really, really poignant here where Isaiah talks about the dead shall live, his dead body too. They awake. Those that dwell in the dust awake. The earth casts out its dead. Then those who have been cast out are supposed to enter into chambers and hide for a moment because God comes out of his place to punish the earth for its iniquity. He's not just punishing humans, he's already cast these angels to the earth. It's an invasion. They know they're going to have to come down here, whether they preempt it with some sort of delusion or they're just thrust down and they have to deal with things is open for debate still. But what's interesting is they're all gathered together and they're all going to be judged. So then the statement is, rejoice those who are in heaven. It's interesting that Jesus said, no man has gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven. And he's talking to, human beings, and that was around 30 AD. And unless you believe some catechism that says that when you die you go up to an ethereal realm and you actually play your harp and you live that way. Or if you're talking about a place outside of time where, from God's perspective, having created time, living outside of the material universe, can say, in the instant that you actually die, you exist with him. But for our perspective, we have to wait to that one point where the whole earth is judged and this transition of hierarchies occurs. The angels are brought low that have rebelled, and those who have actually accepted eternity, immortality from the only source that could do it, which was God, through the act at 33 AD on Golgotha, which actual's root is the 33, from a Messiah who was 33 years old. That's the only source that you can get immortality. So those who dwell in the heavens would be those who were resurrected at the point where those beings were thrown down. So the devil is in great wrath, knowing he has a short time. A metaphor is drawn up all the time as the idea of the second coming of the Messiah, and that is harvest time. In fact, of course, Jerusalem, the temple site, is a circle, a circle for pounding the wheat from the chaff. And then after it's completed, it's brought to this winnowing pile. And in the ancient days, to save a step, they would put a winnowing hearth downwind and take the fork and throw the wheat up into the air. Of course, the wind would carry the chaff away, or it would blow into this hearth and burst into flame almost explosively. And then the grain would fall back to the earth again. That's the metaphor for the end. That's the metaphor for when the Messiah comes back. And those that are actually worth something are caused to be changed, lifted up into heaven to a higher state. And those that aren't, burn up. So I'll leave you with this thought. This is what the point is from the beginning: immortality, life after death, and the idea of is there Is there intelligent life out in the universe? All this has already been answered, but it's a paradigm that people have a hard time embracing because it requires them to look at antiquated, sometimes maligned, always attacked versions of reality. What if you ask Art Bell, he says the two greatest questions that he's trying to answer over the last, 15 years now? Is there life after death, and are we the only intelligent life in the universe? That question is going to be asked over and over again until you turn to the source. So, thank you for listening.